Well, the battle for the office of state comptroller got heated today, with barbs traded on both sides. Republican challenger Harry Wilson was in Albany. He lobbed a bomb at Democratic incumbent Tom DiNapoli, calling him a flip-flopper over a pension fund borrowing scheme. Then the state Democratic Party jumped to DiNapoli's defense, declaring that, quote, hedge fund Harry immediately disclosed his personal financial information. Well, he is here right now, Republican comptroller contender Harry Wilson, to talk more about the developments in the race today.
Hi, Liz. How are you?
I will not call you Hedge Fund Harry. We'll get to that later.
Thank you.
Okay, today you were in Albany to discuss a pension fund borrowing scheme, and just in the very barest of terms, explain what that is.
Sure. So the basic idea that was first created by Comptroller DiNapoli last year was that the underperformance in the pension fund has created significant increases in contribution rates for the pension fund from state and local governments. And those rates are starting to kick in this year, which will be really painful. And so his idea was to basically borrow by deferring those payments into the future, paying them later with interest. And that was the idea. Governor Patterson included in the budget discussions, the latest that I hear is that it will be part of the final budget, although who knows. Comptroller DiNapoli at first was supportive of it, introduced it, and then denied it, then attacked it.
Okay, so is it not a laudable idea to provide some kind of security or predictability for pension fund contributions for the state and municipalities at a time when everyone's feeling the cash squeeze? I mean, is that not a good idea?
Well, it would be laudable if it was a short-term proposal that led to a fix. But there's the problem, and that's why they're not being honest with the facts. Because if you look at the facts, and they haven't released very many, but from what we'll be able to gather from the various sources, is that once this program ends, the contribution levels skyrocket. So right now, the state pays it about $1 billion. They're trying to cap it at around that level. But once the program ends in 6 years, that contribution level goes to about $3 billion. So we're saying we can't afford more than $1 billion today, yet 6 years from now we'll be paying $3 billion. So all it does is make a problem that's really bad today even worse in the future.
And he actually says now, and I've spoken to the Comptroller's office myself, they said, well, we haven't signed off on anything finally yet. And also, they said that this is what they proposed was a little bit more stringent than what was discussed in this three-way agreement that supposedly was reached. So is that true, or is that not true?
Well, I think it's two things. One, I hope they don't. I hope they come out and do oppose it at the end of the day, because it's bad for the taxpayers and it's bad for the pension fund. But if I were a legislator, I'd say, well, you created this idea, so why are you opposing it now? I'm confused as to what you're trying to do. And so I think that's the first piece. But the right thing to do would be to oppose it. But the second piece is on the size of the gap that comes through. Is the most important thing is that people, voters, and legislators need to understand just how big the numbers involved are and what the underlying assumptions are. And by not being transparent about those, people don't realize how big the problem becomes in just a few short years.
So what would you do then in order to provide some kind of sense of security and predictability for people who contribute? And we're not talking about the pensioners. We're talking about contributions that are made by the government into the pension system. What can you do as comptroller, assuming that you were elected, to fix that problem, which is clearly a problem where Tom DiNapoli would not have proposed it?
Right. Well, the biggest problem is we have unrealistic expectations. So the reason we're in this mess is because the pension fund assumes they'll make 8% a year, every year, year in and year out.
Right.
And the reality is over the last 3 years, under Mr. DiNapoli's tenure, the pension fund's actually down over those 3 years. And so that gap between the expectations and actual performance is north of $40 billion. And that's what's creating this problem, is it's being passed through to the municipalities. Now, Mr. DiNapoli would say that, look, the market's off dramatically during that period of time. It's not my fault. I would argue that the pension fund is not supposed to be as risky as that. The pension fund has got a constitutional commitment to its pension years, and we should have lower risk in the portfolio and therefore less volatility. And if we did have lower return expectations than that 8%, something that was more realistic, then we would be, one, honest with the size of our problems, which are more significant than people let on. And then secondly, we'd be able to kind of try to come up with a long-term solution to fix them.
So when you called him a flip-flopper, I mean, you're using some pretty harsh rhetoric here. You've actually said that one of the more important things, sort of the hallmark of your candidacy, is apolitical. You want to take sort of the partisanship out of the Comptroller's office. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it should be a professional office, but it doesn't mean you can't be kind of direct about proposals. He can't put up a proposal, and then distance himself from his very own proposal, one that's basically identical to what he proposed, and then criticize it all within a 72-hour period and expect to get away with it. That's not fair to the voters, and it's not fair to the taxpayers. People need to know the truth. And I think being a professional means not going after something just because it's proposed by the other party, but because it's just fundamentally wrong on the merits.
Okay, so speaking of telling the truth, they are hitting you with some fairly hard criticism today. First of all, they called you hedge fund Harry when you did actually work for a hedge fund. So I suppose one could argue that that's true.
Well, it's funny because they are criticizing my investment experience when half the job of the controller is managing a large investment fund, and their candidate has no investment experience whatsoever. So I think the whole thing is kind of funny. But if they want to go after it, they're welcome to go after it.
But do you not agree that there is a little bit of an image problem? You did come from Wall Street, and this is a time where people are enormously distrustful of Wall Street. You're talking about a time when there were huge federal bailouts of the street, and that people, you're seeing partisan protests, or not partisan protests, but really populist protests in front of Wall Street banks. I mean, down in New York City. I mean, don't you worry that you're going to be tarred with that same brush? And that's clearly what they're trying to do to you here.
Oh, there's no question that's what they're trying to do. But I think I trust voters to be able to kind of see through that. And the reality is, what caused the problem? The problem was caused by too much leverage at the investment banks. And that's where all the bailout money went, was to the investment banks and AIG and Fannie and Freddie. The last time I worked at an investment bank was 1995. So 15 years ago.
And that was Goldman, is that right?
Goldman Sachs, that's right. Basically no connection to anything that's happened in the last 15 years. What I did do since that period of time was basically two things. I invested in companies, which is analogous to the controller's role overseeing the pension fund, and I worked to restructure a lot of broken companies, most recently General Motors. And I think that's exactly the skill set we need in New York State. You notice they never talk about my experience restructuring General Motors. The first attack they hit on me was talking about it, and then they backed away, in part because they realized it was a president of their own party that engineered that work. And then secondly, that it's been very successful.
And the president of their own party means a Democrat. You're a Republican, which is probably, I mean, you don't shy away from the fact that you worked on the task force, but at the same time, you don't exactly highlight the fact that Barack Obama, you were working for a Democrat either necessarily. You don't talk about the politics of it.
Right, because it wasn't a concern. I'll tell you exactly how it came about. I mean, we were in a crisis. Remember how bad things were in early 2009. The market was almost half of where it is today. Most people thought we were going to slip into a second Great Depression. I was concerned about it too. I had this very deep restructuring skill set that I thought could be valuable to the administration. And so I reached out and I said, look, this is my experience. I'd love to help. If you see a role for me, let me know. And by the way, I'm a Republican. If that's a problem, you should tell me too. They said, we don't care. You've got a great skill set. We'd love to have you. I said, great. And our team worked so well and so collaboratively, even though we had very different philosophies, very different viewpoints, because we basically were focused on getting the right job done for the country. And if more people took that approach, whether it's in Albany or Washington, we'd be in much better shape as a nation and as a state.
Now, they're talking about your public disclosure, your financial disclosure. You were required to file a financial disclosure with the Commission on Public Integrity on June 10th as being the nominee of, well, actually conservative and Republican parties, and you say that you've done that.
I filed it last week.
And what is in there specifically that people are going to be able to see? You actually also gave permission for them to post it online, although we haven't seen it yet, so it has not yet been publicly released. What's in there, and will it answer some of these questions in terms of what your personal investments are, where you might have a conflict of interest, for example, or where you're putting your own money, which is essentially where you're asking voters to put their trust in you?
Sure. Well, it's very funny because they made such a big deal out of this, and what they'll see is there's not much of a big deal to report. I've answered all the questions. None of it's redacted. I met a standard of transparency that's as high as anybody could be asked to meet. And my personal investments that are in stocks are actually quite limited because I actually have a bearish view on the market right now. I think the market's gotten ahead of itself. I'd be happy to talk about that at length.
So you took money out of the market, actually?
Yes.
And where did you put it?
Mostly in cash.
In cash, where? In a bank, you mean?
Yeah, in my brokerage account.
Okay, I got it.
Not on my mattress.
Right.
I don't want anybody showing up at my house tomorrow. But I've got a lot of illiquid investments and real estate and things like that aren't part of the forum. So it doesn't, frankly, give you. It's just a form that gives you. It highlights the conflicts, and you'll see that I don't really have any conflicts. And
will you release your tax returns?
Yes, I said a long time ago that I was going to do that well in advance of the election. I'll do it sometime in July. And I'm sure even though they've shown a lot of interest in those, they'll see that those aren't a very big deal either.
How much